Hi guys, I wanted to make this quick tutorial on how to feed and maintain a sourdough starter. I use a sourdough starter to make homemade breads of various kinds, and you can also use it to make things like pizza, and waffles or pancakes are wonderful, and pretty much any kind of bread type of item. I've been maintaining a sourdough starter for about 12 years, and I just love using it and find that it makes just some really great tasting bread and other things. And basically, I use to store the sourdough starter, I use a 32-ounce quart-sized mason jar, and with the lid, the two-piece lid with the rubber-coated piece inverted, flipped up so that the rubber points upward, as you can see there, and then the lid is loosely placed on top. And I primarily maintain my starter and store it in the refrigerator and in between usages, and sometimes I will keep it out of the refrigerator to kind of regenerate it every so often, maybe once every couple of months or something. I'll leave it out of the fridge and then I'll feed it more often. When I'm keeping it in the refrigerator, and if I'm making bread, using it to make bread, for example, once every 2 weeks, then I would just feed it every time I use the starter to make bread. And so at the approximate 1 to 2 week interval, if stored in the refrigerator, and then if you store it in room temperature, you need to feed it more often, more like every day or every other day. And so I'm just going to go over the process of feeding and maintaining it with you. Basically, coming out of the fridge, sometimes there's some dark marks on in the top part of the mason jar, like you see here, and that's just dried material. It's pretty benign, and one of the great things about sourdough starter is with the acidic environment created in it, it's highly resistant to any kind of spoilage. And usually it's kind of foamy inside and should have kind of a yeasty, soury smell to it. So basically the first thing I do is I use a wooden spoon, one like this, the curved edge, and I'll stir it up. You stir up the starter, and it's about the consistency of pancake batter, maybe a little thicker. And let's get it kind of stirred up there, and you'll notice that the level, I try to maintain the level right about halfway, so there should be about 16 ounces or about a pint of starter in there. And I think the last time this was fed was maybe about a week ago when I made bread. And so after stirring that up, now you want to, if you're going to make bread, you want to go ahead and empty about half of that. So you want to use about 1 cup, or 8 fluid ounces in your recipe if you're making like a 2-loaf of bread recipe, which is what I normally do. And so, and if you're just feeding it and you don't have time to make anything with it and you just need to feed it, you would just dump it down the sink, or if you want to share a cup of it with a friend, you can do that as well. For this video, I'm just going to go ahead and dump it out because I'm not making bread today. Here, I'll just dump it out in this, like I would, as if I was making bread. Dump out about a cup of it, and always keep some napkins handy just to keep things wiped down. Alright, and to feed the starter, what I like to do is I use a combination of whole grain flours. I use whole grain rye flour, whole grain dark rye flour, and then I use as the primary component, I'll be using the whole grain spelt flour, or you can use whole wheat, or you could even use a refined unbleached flour, especially if you're going to be making mostly white breads or pizzas, and that might be a better choice. But I think the consensus is generally that using whole grain flours is better for maintaining the sourdough starter and for supporting the microorganisms, the yeast and the bacteria that that live in the starter and give it its unique properties. And as far as the ratio, I usually use about 25% to 33%, so about a quarter to 1/3 part rye flour, and the balance being either whole grain spelt or whole grain wheat flour. I've also found that specifically the whole grain pastry flour is really good to use for the starter because it doesn't have as much gluten in it, and so it won't gum up as easily, and the gas bubbles will be allowed to escape without worrying about an overflow as the starter ferments in the refrigerator or on your countertop. It will tend to rise, and sometimes you might need to shake it down so that it drops. But using whole grain pastry flour seems to minimize the rising of it and the potential spillage. Anyways, and so basically, having dispensed the amount of starter that I'm going to use in a recipe, if I was, now I'm going to feed the mother starter. And I use a small cup, and I'll just go ahead and add about a 1/4 cup of whole grain rye flour, and I'll do about half a cup of the whole grain spelt flour, so I'll do a couple of these 1/4 cupfuls, and just dump it in there. And I mainly eyeball it, and then I'll just add some water, and usually about half a cup or a cup or so. I use my wooden spoon to stir it up, and the goal is to basically try and get the consistency of about a pancake batter, and for it to be about halfway full. And stir it up pretty good. Some people like to leave it chunky in there in hopes that it'll have a time release effect in feeding the microorganisms in there. But I usually stir it up pretty good. And it looks like this time I'm probably got a little bit more than half full, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be precise, and I'll just clean that up. And usually what I'll do is, I don't worry about cleaning it too much, but I'll wipe off the lid because the lid will get some dark liquid on there sometimes, and I'll wipe off that dark stuff, and I'll wipe the rim of the mason jar pretty good too. Each time I feed it, and just to keep it kind of cleaned off. But usually, like I said, the acidity will really prevent any kind of mold or spoilage going on there. And put the lid back on loosely with, like I said, the lid turned upside down, and screw the ring lid on it with a loose fit, and I'll just pop that back in the refrigerator. And like I said, this will last a good 1 to 2 weeks, I think, between feedings. Anyways, that's my tutorial on how to feed sourdough starter. Hope it helps you, and thanks for watching.